Greetings everyone, and welcome back to the Crime Whisper. Today. We journey into the dark heart of Mexico City, exploring a series of chilling tales that reveal the underbelly of one of the world's most dangerous cities. This is Mexico City Crime Stories. The city was alive. Mexico City, sprawling and chaotic, pulsed with life in the heat of midday. Its streets were a maze of noise, colors, smells, and stories. Some stories were whispered over tortillas at street stalls, others were screamed across the neon-lit alleys of the downtown. It was here that a shadow moved, one that would grow into the sort of legend only whispered about in the dark. His name was Alejandro Cortazal. Alejandro was a small-time courier, but his roots were not ordinary. He carried messages for cartels, encrypted phones for politicians, and small packages for people who disappeared from the public eye. His life was a tightrope, balanced between danger and survival. On a Monday morning in June, Alejandro was approached by a woman named Mariana Salazar. She was elegant, dressed in designer clothes that looked out of place in the gritty neighborhood of Tepito. Her eyes held a sharp intelligence. She asked him to deliver a small package to a safe house in Colonia. Alejandro didn't ask questions, he just accepted. What he didn't know was that the package contained something far more dangerous than he could imagine. A list of names tied to one of the biggest corruption scandals in Mexican history, the kind of scandal that could shake the government and send powerful men to prison. As he walked through the narrow streets of Tepito, Alejandro noticed he was being followed. A black van moved behind him. Slowly but steadily, he quickened his pace, weaving into alleys, ducking into markets. But the van stayed with him. His heart raced. This was the kind of thing you don't survive if you're careless. He finally made it to Colonia. Roma had slipped into a small apartment. The door was already ajar inside. Mariana waited. She was pale, her eyes darting nervously. "They know," she whispered. "We have no time." Alejandro handed over the package. But Mariana's phone rang. She answered quickly. "Yes," she said. Her face fell. Alejandro heard the word vendetta before he could react. There was a loud knock at the door. Mariana froze. The door burst open. For men in tactical gear entered, guns drawn. Alejandro had seconds to react. He grabbed Mariana, ducked behind a table, and pulled a pistol from his jacket. Gunfire erupted. The chaos was deafening. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. Alejandro fired blindly. Mariana screamed. One of the men fell. Another returned fire. Alejandro took a bullet in his shoulder. Pain exploded in his arm, but adrenaline pushed him forward through the smoke. Mariana shouted, "Go, run." Alejandro dragged her out of the apartment and into the street. They ran through the narrow maze of Roma, their pursuers close behind, somewhere deep in the city. A deal was unraveling by the end of the day. Alejandro and Mariana were in a safe house on the outskirts of Mexico City. They nursed wounds and planned their next move. "Who was that?" Alejandro asked between gasps. "They call themselves La Mano Negra." Mariana replied, "They're not just criminals. They're an organization, part cartel, part government. They keep order, but on their own terms." The safe house was guarded, but Alejandro knew it was only a matter of time before they were found. The list in Mariana's possession was powerful enough to destroy them both. They decided to split up. Alejandro would take the list to a journalist he trusted. Mariana would disappear. Alejandro moved through the city like a ghost. His body ached from the wound, and every street seemed to whisper threats. The journalist, Javier Ortega, met him in a quiet cafe. Javier was known for exposing corruption. Alejandro handed him a flash drive. "This will bring them down," Alejandro said. Softly, Javier nodded grimly. "This will change everything." They were interrupted by a loud bang outside. Alejandro's instincts screamed danger. He turned just as bullets shattered the cafe window. Javier fell. Alejandro pulled the injured journalist inside and fled through the back alleys somewhere in the shadows of Mexico City. La Mano Negra was closing in. The next days were a blur. Alejandro became a fugitive, moving between safe houses, Always looking over his shoulder, he contacted Mariana once her voice was distant. Trembling, "The list is safe," she said. "We need to expose them before they find us." Alejandro knew she was right, but the cost would be high. He arranged to meet Javier at an abandoned warehouse. Javier was gravely wounded, but alive. Alejandro handed him a burner phone call. "Whoever you have to," Alejandro urged before Javier could respond. The warehouse doors crashed open. A swarm of armed men poured in. Gunfire erupted again. Alejandro fought back, but there were too many. He was captured and taken to an undisclosed location. Days passed. Alejandro was kept in darkness, chained, interrogated. They wanted the list. They wanted Mariandro said nothing. Meanwhile, Mariana worked behind the scenes. She contacted journalists, lawyers, and activists. Her network spread the list online anonymously. Within hours, Mexico City erupted. Protests filled the streets. The names on the list were powerful politicians, cartel leaders, businessmen. They could not be ignored. La Mano Negra, still captive, listened as guards whispered about riots and investigations. He realized they were losing control in a daring move. Mariana staged a rescue with help from activists, hackers, and street fighters. She stormed the building where Alejandro was held. The guards were caught off guard. Alejandro was freed, escaped into the chaos of the protests. The city had become their cover. The aftermath was a turning point. La Mano Negra grip weakened. Investigations began. Names were called out on live television. Some powerful figures resigned. Others disappeared. Leandro and Mariana vanished into the shadows of Mexico City. The city never forgot them. Their story became legend, a tale of courage, betrayal, and survival in a city where crime and corruption were inseparable. Streets still whispered their names. Solandro and Mariana knew they couldn't hide forever. Their names were now carved into the public consciousness, and they had become targets. Yet, in the labyrinth of Mexico City's streets, there was a strange comfort in anonymity. Mariana reached out to allies in the underground. She found shelter for them in an abandoned textile factory in Iztapalapa, where workers who had suffered under corruption now lived in secrecy. It became their fortress, a safe haven where they could plan their next moves. Leandro recovered from his wounds slowly at night. He wandered through the factory's roof, looking down at the city sprawled beneath him. The neon lights glimmered like distant stars, a reminder that the city never truly slept. Mariana worked relentlessly using encrypted channels. She leaked more names and documents. Each revelation fueled protests and street riots. People began calling them Los Fantasmas, the ghosts, the unseen forces, challenging the power structures. But power never yields without a fight. La Mano Negra retaliated. They sent assassins, hackers, and spies into Alejandro and Mariana's networks. A wave of violence erupted across Mexico City one night. Alejandro returned to the safe house to find Mariana gone. A note was left. "They know where we are. I'm drawing them away. Be ready." Alejandro's heart pounded. He knew she was walking into danger. He armed himself, moving through the city with calculated precision, avoiding surveillance cameras and checkpoints. Mariana had chosen the Zocalo, the city's heart, as her stage. She had arranged a massive demonstration, knowing the media would be there as the crowd swelled. She revealed the truth behind the list. La Mano Negra's corrupt network, its ties to politics and crime, and the names of those in power who had kept the system running. The noise was deafening. Alejandro watched from the crowd, his eyes searching for her. Suddenly, gunfire rang out. Chaos erupted. People screamed and ran. Alejandro fought through the crowd, reaching Mariana just as a masked assassin aimed at her without hesitation. He intercepted the shot, taking it in his shoulder again. Mariana dragged him away into the chaos. They disappeared into the labyrinth of Mexico City, blending into the night. Their story became the spark for change. Investigations grew, arrests were made, but La Mano Negra remained elusive. Always a step ahead, Alejandro and Mariana, wounded but unbroken, moved deeper underground. They were no longer just fugitives. They were symbols of resistance. The city kept moving around them, but every whisper of corruption carried their names, and somewhere, in the shadows of Mexico City, Los Fantasmas watched and waited. Their war had only just begun months past, and the city shifted under the weight of the chaos. Alejandro and Mariana had vanished into the veins of Mexico City, living as ghosts. They had allies now, hackers in Condesa, street fighters in its, and journalists scattered across the country. Each was part of an intricate web they called El Red, the net in the back rooms of a cafe in La Roma. Alejandro met with Diego, a seasoned hacker who had once exposed a massive financial scandal. Mariana stirring something dangerous, Diego said, his voice low. La Mano Negra will hunt her harder now. Alejandro nodded, his mind heavy with the weight of their mission. The list had become more than names. It was a manifesto, a blueprint to dismantle an entrenched system of corruption. Mariana, meanwhile, had taken refuge in the underground tunnels beneath the city. The subway and drainage systems became her domain from there. She directed protests, spread leaks, and orchestrated chaos against La Mano Negra. One evening, Alejandro joined her. They met under the dim glow of a flickering light in the tunnel. We've been lucky, Mariana said, but it won't last. They're closing in. Alejandro placed a hand over her shoulder. Then we give them a fight they'll never forget. Their plan was audacious. Infiltrate La Mano Negra's headquarters. Mariana's intelligence had pinpointed their operations centered deep within the city. Hidden beneath a luxury skyscraper, they gathered their allies. Diego, street fighters, and brave journalists. It was a coalition forged in danger. The night of the infiltration, Alejandro and Mariana moved like shadows. They bypassed security, disabled cameras, and slipped into the building unnoticed. Every step was a calculated risk inside. They found evidence, files, recordings, and documents that exposed the depth of La Mano Negra's reach. They began uploading everything to encrypted channels, but the alarms rang out. They were surrounded. Firefight erupted. Alejandro and Mariana fought fiercely, covering each other as they tried to escape. They reached a service shaft and disappeared into the bowels of the city. The leak was instantaneous. News outlets exploded with the revelations. The public erupted in outrage. La Mano Negra members were arrested, and governments promised reform. Alejandro and Mariana watched the city from afar. Wounded but unbowed, Mexico City changed that night. The story of Los Fantasmas became legend, a testament to courage and sacrifice in a city ruled by shadows. They knew their fight was far from over, but for now, they had won. The streets whispered their victory, and the ghosts faded into the city's heartbeat. In the weeks that followed, Alejandro and Mariana vanished completely. Mexico City buzzed with news of arrests and reforms, but whispers persisted about the ghosts that had struck the heart of corruption. They became a myth, an idea whispered in hushed tones, a symbol that resistance was possible. Mariana took to the streets in disguise, blending into crowds during protests. Alejandro disappeared into the underground, mapping the intricate networks of corruption that still survived. They communicated only through encrypted channels, always wary. One rainy night in the borough of Cayocan, Mariana received a message, a name, a place, and a time. It was an invitation, or a challenge. Alejandro met her in a cafe lined with old books and dim lights. This could be our last mission, she said, her voice steady, despite the storm outside. They traced the lead to an abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of the city. It was rumored to be the new center for La Mano Negra's remnants. Under cover of night, they infiltrated the mill inside. They discovered a new operation, human trafficking intertwined with political power plays. A darker layer of corruption. They began recording, documenting everything. Alejandro's hand shook as he filmed, not out of fear, but the weight of knowing how far this corruption reached. The sound of boots echoed through the hall. They were discovered. Chase ensued, weaving through rusted machinery and broken hallways. Alejandro and Mariana fought with everything they had left in the chaos. Mariana was cornered, Alejandro turned back, shooting at the approaching threat, giving her a chance to escape. The last shot rang out, echoing through the empty mill. Alejandro fell. Mariana dragged him out into the rain-soaked night. They vanished again, deeper into the city's veins. The footage they leaked from the mill caused an uproar. International investigations began. La Mano Negra's remnants were dismantled, piece by piece. In the heart of Mexico City, Alejandro recovered. They watched the sunrise from a rooftop, the city sprawling beneath them. "We changed something," Mariana said softly. Leandro nodded. "But the fight is never over." They faded once more into the city's shadows. Los Fantasmas had become more than people. They were a movement. Mexico City continued to live, breathe, and whisper their story, a story of defiance that would never be forgotten. Years passed. Mexico City shifted, transformed by protests, reform, and whispers of the ghosts who had changed the city's destiny. Alejandro and Mariana became legends told in the streets, stories of courage and resistance against an unyielding system there. Names were etched in murals in Colonia, Roma, remembered in songs sung by street vendors, and in the chants of protesters. They were immortalized, not just for what they had done, but for what they had inspired. Despite their notoriety, Alejandro and Mariana remained hidden. They moved through the city under new identities, their past lives erased, except for the memory they carried. But the fight never truly ended. One evening, Alejandro sat in a dimly lit cafe in San Angel, watching the rain streak down the window. Mariana joined him silently, a knowing look in her eyes. "There's another list," she whispered, "and they're already moving." Alejandro nodded, understanding without words. The city was an endless battle. Corruption never slept. They prepared again, gathering allies quietly. Their network had grown, a hidden army of activists, hackers, and whistleblowers scattered across the city. The next operation was unlike anything before. It was a war in the shadows, fought not with guns alone, but with information, strategy, and resolve. For months, they worked unseen, dismantling criminal networks, exposing corrupt officials, and saving those lost in the system. Each victory was a whisper, each defeat a lesson in the end. Alejandro and Mariana became more than fugitives. They became a movement that transcended their own lives. Mexico City remembered them not just as Los Fan, but as symbols of relentless defiance. And in the city's heartbeat, their story lived on, a story that would never truly end. Years later, the city still whispered about Los Fantasmas. Alejandro and Mariana had become myths, the embodiment of resistance in Mexico City. Their story was told in hushed conversations, graffiti art, and anonymous blog posts. New threats emerged, different but equally insidious. Corruption had evolved, and so had they. Alejandro and Mariana adapted, not as vigilantes, but as architects of a new movement, a network of transparency and citizen power. They trained others in secrecy, teaching how to fight corruption, not with violence alone, but with knowledge, courage, and unity. Their recruits were young, fierce, and determined to keep the fight alive. In an unassuming evening in the heart of Mexico City, Mariana stood before a gathering in the Plaza de las Tres Culturas. The air was electric with anticipation. Hidden in the crowd, watched her speak. She was no longer just a fugitive. She was a leader. Her words carried the weight of years of struggle. Corruption thrives in silence, she said. We will speak, we will resist, we will reclaim our city. The crowd erupted in applause. Alejandro smiled faintly, feeling the truth in her words. They had given the city a gift, the belief that change was possible. As the crowd dispersed, Mariana found Alejandro. We started a fire, she said softly. He nodded. And it will burn long after we're gone. They vanished again, into the labyrinth of the city, leaving behind a legacy that could never be erased. Mexico City remained alive, restless and defiant, and somewhere in the shadows, Los Fantasmas watched over it still, guardians of truth in a city that never slept. Decades passed, and the legend of Los Fantasmas became a living myth woven into the fabric of Mexico. City Alejandro and Mariana had long disappeared from the streets, but their movement endured. Generations of activists drew inspiration from their story. Underground networks flourished. Citizens armed with information and courage began to challenge corruption openly. The phrase Los Fantasmas Live became a rallying cry. City transformed. Neighborhoods that were once dominated by fear began to thrive. Art flourished in murals that told tales of resistance. Universities hosted lectures on civil courage, using the story of Alejandro and Mariana as a case study. One evening, an old man with a weathered face walked through the streets of Tepito. He carried nothing but a notebook filled with maps, names and plans. He was no longer the courier or the fugitive. He was a symbol. Mariana watched from the shadows. She no longer needed to fight. The city had taken up her cause. Alejandro and she had become eternal whispers of resistance. And in Mexico City, every corner told a story of two ghosts who challenged power and lit a fire that no darkness could ever extinguish. The city still moved, breathed, and dreamed. And Los Fantasmas remained its heartbeat, but the story of Los Fantasmas was far from finished. A decade later, whispers began anew. A new generation of corruption had risen, more sophisticated and harder to track. Alejandro and Mariana had prepared for this eventuality, leaving behind not just a legacy, but a movement ready to adapt. In the dim glow of a hidden library in Colonia Juarez, a group of young activists gathered around a figure cloaked in shadow. It was Mariana. Beside her stood Alejandro, older but still vigilant. They were teaching not just strategy, but philosophy, how to weave courage, truth, and solidarity into action. Mariana spoke to them. This is our inheritance. The fight doesn't end because we survive it. It ends when no one is willing to stand against it. Our city's soul depends on you. The students listened, absorbing every word. Months later, a coordinated wave of protests erupted across Mexico City, inspired by Los Fantasmas. Citizens mobilized with precision, armed with knowledge and determination. Corruption faced its greatest challenge in decades. Alejandro and Mariana watched from the shadows as the city rose again. They had become the quiet architects of a revolution. Their presence felt in every chant, every banner, every story told in the streets. As dawn broke over the Mariana turned to Alejandro. It's bigger than us now. He nodded. It always was. They stepped back into the shadows, leaving the city in the hands of those who had inherited their fight. Hand in the labyrinth of Mexico City, the name Los Fantasmas echoed on, a testament to courage, resistance, and the enduring power of truth. Years turned into decades, and Mexico City evolved under the influence of the movement begun by Alejandro and Mariana. Los Fantasmas became more than a legend. They were a doctrine, passed down through hidden networks, clandestine schools, and the murmurs of the streets. Mariana, now older, sat in a quiet courtyard in surrounded by young activists. Her voice was calm but firm. We taught you to fight with your voice and your courage. Now you must teach others. The work never stops. Alejandro, beside her, nodded silently. He had become a figure of myth, known to many only through fragments of stories and graffiti art. He was content in his anonymity. The network grew, stretching to every corner of the city. They became a living resistance, untraceable. Persistent corruption shifted in response, but so did Los Fantasmas. Night, Mariana received an encrypted message. They know they're coming. She looked at Alejandro. Our fight is back. They assembled their core allies. Now a well-trained global network. Their mission was no longer just survival. It was the defense of the movement. The city became a chessboard, with each side anticipating the other's moves. Skirmishes erupted, some violent, some fought in cyberspace, but Los Fantasmas adapted, turning each setback into strength. In the shadows of Mexico City, Alejandro and Mariana remained the beating heart of the resistance. Their story, now etched in the city's soul, became eternal. And somewhere in the darkness, Los Fantasmas watched over the city they had shaped, guarding the truth that would never die as time passed. The myth of Los Fantasmas spread far beyond the streets of Mexico City. Activist movements in other cities began adopting their symbol, a simple, stylized ghost. As a banner of resistance, Alejandro and Mariana became more than leaders. They were the architects of a legacy in the heart of Mexico City. Mariana convened a secret council of activists, hackers, and whistleblowers. They called themselves La Red de Fantasmas, the Ghost Network. Their mission was no longer just fighting corruption, but preserving truth itself. Alejandro, now older and bearing the scars of decades, stood beside her. "They'll keep coming," he said, "but so will we." The city was no longer silent. Every mural, every protest, every song carried fragments of their story. A new threat loomed, a powerful syndicate that had risen in the void left by La Mano Negra. It moved with precision, infiltrating politics and industry. Its reach unseen, but felt. Los Fantasmas began their work again. They infiltrated boardrooms, hacked encrypted servers, and leaked data that exposed the syndicate's web of influence. The battle became a war of shadows, fought in the alleys, in the cloud, in whispers across encrypted channels. In one decisive night, Mariana addressed the city from the roof of a high-rise in Condesa. Her voice broadcast through underground networks. "We are all ghosts now. The fight is not mine alone. It belongs to the city." Alejandro watched her from the edge of the rooftop. "The ghosts never rest," he said. "Damned." Mexico City listened. Los Fantasmas had become eternal, not people, but the living spirit of defianciers turned into generations. And Los Fantasmas became less of a name and more of an idea, a movement embedded into the soul of Mexico City. The network Mariana and Alejandro built had spread worldwide, inspiring activists in cities far beyond Mexico and Mexico City. Every neighborhood told fragments of their story in Tepito. The graffiti was bold and proud in La Roma. Coffee shops held quiet meetings, planning their own resistance cells in Cayo. Murals depicted two figures, a man and a woman cloaked in shadow. Mariana and Alejandro had aged, but their purpose remained unshaken. They lived separately now, each a phantom in the city's veins, emerging only when needed. A new threat arose, an international cartel operating with political cover. They were ruthless, but Los Fantasmas were relentless in a hidden bunker beneath the city. Mariana convened with a new generation of leaders. "The fight is evolving," she said. "Our enemies change, but the mission remains the same." Alejandro joined her, carrying the weight of decades. "They can bury us," he said, "but they can't bury the idea." That night, coordinated operations struck across the city. Exposes, sabotage, and protests dismantled the cartel's influence piece by piece. Mexico City roared in response. The movement had become unstoppably. The quiet aftermath. Alejandro and Mariana met on a rooftop overlooking the glowing city. The air was electric with possibility. "We built something eternal," Mariana said. Alejandro nodded. "And Los Fantasmas will never die." And so, in the heart of Mexico City, their story continued, a living legend of resistance, courage, and the unending struggle for truth. Decades later, Los Fantasmas had become a symbol, whispered in the wind of Mexico City, an eternal myth woven into the city's identity. Alejandro was now a shadow, a figure of legend, known only to those who walked the hidden paths of resistance. Mariana had grown into a living icon, traveling quietly, speaking only to those who would continue the fight. Her face was painted on walls, her words carried on the lips of countless protesters in the labyrinth beneath the city. A new council met, the inheritors of the Fantasmas mission. Alejandro and Mariana watched over them. Unseen, a new era had begun, one where information was power, and transparency was the shield against corruption. One night, from an abandoned rooftop in Centro Historico, Mariana addressed a clandestine gathering. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "Our enemies will change, our struggle will never end, but every generation will have its ghosts." Alejandro stood beside her, Watching the city breathe beneath them, we were never just fighting corruption, we were teaching hope. The city pulsed with life, each street a testament to resistance somewhere. Deep within the noise and chaos, Los Fantasmas lived on, not as people, but as an unbreakable spirit, and the heartbeat of Mexico City continued, carrying their story forward forever. But even legends are tested years later. A powerful coalition of corrupt corporations and political forces emerged, more covert, more dangerous than any before. They operated in silence, controlling economies and influencing governments without leaving a trace. The whispers in Mexico City grew. A new name joined the lore of resistance. Los Fantasmas, Nuevos Alejandro and Mariana, had trained them, prepared them, but they had never imagined a threat this vastine. The underbelly of the city. Mariana convened with the leaders of Los Fantasmas. Nuevos Alejandro listened quietly as she spoke. "We have to evolve," she said. "We can't fight them with the old ways alone. We need strategy, intelligence, and unity." The council agreed. They began a new kind of war, one fought through digital networks, public exposes, and grassroots movements. Mexico City became a living battlefield in plazas, in cafes, in the murmur of the subway. Los Fantasmas, Nuevos worked silently. Alejandro and Mariana moved unseen, guiding them one night, under the flickering lights of a rooftop. Mariana turned to Alejandro. "We taught them to fight, but now we must teach them to endure." He nodded. The city sprawling endlessly before them because ghosts never die. And so Los Fantasmas lived on, a shadowy pulse in Mexico City's heart, an unending story of courage, resistance, and the eternal struggle for truth. The city itself seemed to pulse with the energy of the movement. In every alley, every plaza, every hidden corner, there was evidence of their work: posters, graffiti, encrypted messages passed between cell phones. Los Fantasmas, Nuevos had become a living network. Their presence felt, but never fully seen. Mariana and Alejandro watched from the shadows, their faces etched with the weight of years and the burden of the fight. They knew the struggle would never truly end, but they had given the city a gift, a perpetual force that would rise whenever corruption tried to reclaim its hold. And in that quiet understanding, they vanished once more into the heartbeat of Mexico City. Their story, carried in whispers and shadows, became an unending legend, a testament to the idea that as long as there is injustice, there will be those who rise to challenge it. Los Fantasmas were eternal in the years that followed. Los Fantasmas became more than a movement. They became a philosophy. Their symbol, the stylized ghost, was adopted by countless groups across the world, fighting injustice. The legend of Alejandro and Mariana transcended borders, whispered in the corridors of power, and sung in the streets of countless cities in Mexico City. A new generation of activists gathered at the Zocalo every year on the anniversary of Los Fantasmas' first act. They carried banners and chanted their names, not just as homage, but as a promise to continue the fight. Now older and wiser, watched from the shadows with Alejandro, they had built something far greater than themselves. The city remembers. Mariana said softly. Leandro nodded. "And so must we, together." They disappeared into the night, leaving behind a city forever changed. The story of Los Fantasmas lived on, eternal, unseen, and unbroken even decades later. Whispers of Los Fantasmas echoed through the veins of Mexico City. New generations grew up hearing fragments of their story. A story told in art, in protest songs, and in hushed conversations, in crowded markets. In quiet cafes. The symbol of the ghost became a universal icon, representing not only the fight against corruption, but the spirit of courage and defiance in the face of oppression. Alejandro and Mariana, though rarely seen, continued to influence from the shadows. They became mentors in an unseen network, guiding activists, hackers, and truth seekers around the world. One rainy evening, Mariana stood alone on the rooftop of a crumbling building in Tepito. The lights of the city shimmered like distant stars. She whispered to the wind, "The fight never ends. and somewhere deep in the city, Alejandro heard her words. He nodded quietly. The ghosts moved silently through the city, their story forever alive. Los Fantasmas were no longer just a name. They were a movement, an idea, a heartbeat that would never fade. And so, Los Fantasmas' influence spread beyond Mexico City. Carried in whispers across continents, activist cells in distant cities adopted their tactics, their symbol, their courage in cafes, from Buenos Aires to Barcelona, from Nairobi to New York. The legend was retold. Mariana and Alejandro became myths themselves, figures both real and imagined, inspiring those who fought for justice in the depths of Mexico City. Alejandro penned their final message in a hidden journal, sealing it away in the catacombs beneath the city. It was a message to the future, a call to arms, a plea for vigilance. Mariana, standing beside him, placed her hand over his. "We did what we could," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "And they will do the rest." They disappeared into the labyrinth of the city once more, leaving behind a legacy that would live forever. Mexico City, with its endless pulse, continued to breathe their story, and in every whisper of the wind, in every shadow between buildings, Los Fantasmas lived on, eternal guardians of truth and resistance. As the years folded into history, the city itself became a living testament to Los Fantasmas. Every mural, every chant, every story told in Mexico City carried their essence. They were no longer merely rebels. They had become the embodiment of resistance itself. A new generation arose, calling themselves the keepers of the ghosts they trained in secret. Carrying the lessons Alejandro and Mariana had left behind, they operated in cyberspace, in the streets, and in the hearts of the people. In an undisclosed location, Mariana addressed the keepers for the last time. Her voice carried wisdom born of decades. "The fight is eternal. We are all ghosts. If we dare to stand against injustice." Alejandro stood beside her, his figure fading into the shadows, and the city will never stop breathing. They vanished again, leaving behind no trace but the symbol of the ghost, an eternal reminder that truth and courage can never be silenced. Mexico City continued to live, fight, and remember. On Los Fantasmas became forever immortal. Generations later, Los Fantasmas became an enduring symbol woven into the identity of Mexico City. Their story was no longer confined to whispers and murals. It was taught in schools, celebrated in art festivals, and inscribed into the city's cultural DNA. Children in neighborhoods like Tepito and La Roma grew up hearing the legend, told as both a cautionary tale and a source of hope. Activists carried their methods forward, adapting them to new struggles, fighting modern forms of injustice in the hidden archives beneath the city. Alejandro's journal and Mariana's writings were preserved, a manual for resistance, a blueprint for courage. They became sacred texts for those who would carry the mantle. On the anniversary of their first mission, crowds gathered at the Zocalo, a mural of Alejandro and Mariana, their faces half-shadowed, covered an entire building. Beneath it was written, "Los Fantasmas viven." The ghosts live somewhere in the crowd. An old voice whispered, "They will never die." And in the heartbeat of Mexico City, Los Fantasmas lived on, eternal, unseen, and unstoppable. But even as Los Fantasmas became a legend, the shadows they fought in continued to shift. A new era brought with it more complex forms of corruption, hidden alliances between corporations, politicians, and transnational organizations. These forces operated in silence, wielding power through economic dominance, digital manipulation, and political influence. Mexico City had changed. It was a metropolis pulsing with innovation, commerce, and culture, but also with the quiet hum of resistance. Neighborhoods that were once battlegrounds had transformed into hubs of activism, and art murals depicting Los Fantasmas adorned walls in Colonia Roma, Tepito, and Coyoacán, a reminder of the city's enduring spirit. The keepers of the ghosts had grown into an intricate network, spanning continents. Alejandro and Mariana, though older and more hidden than ever, continued to guide them. They communicated through encrypted channels, passing down tactics, strategies, and wisdom. One rainy night, Mariana convened a council in a hidden courtyard beneath Mexico City. The air was thick with anticipation. Activists from across the city gathered. Hackers, journalists, organizers, and artists. "We face a threat unlike any before," Mariana said. "They hide in plain sight, controlling the systems that govern our lives. This fight will be fought differently, with intelligence, innovation, and unity." Alejandro stepped forward, his voice calm but powerful. "We are the ghosts. We have always adapted and we will adapt again." They began a campaign unlike any before. They infiltrated corporate networks, leaked incriminating evidence, and organized massive protests that spanned the city. They used technology to their advantage, creating encrypted communication channels that could not be traced in the streets. The people responded. Activism spread like wildfire from small gatherings in local cafes to massive rallies in the Zaca. The movement grew. Los Fantasmas were no longer a myth. They were a living, breathing force. Alejandro and Mariana watched from the shadows, guiding, teaching, and protecting the new generation. They knew that their time was finite, but their legacy was eternal. One night, in the heart of the city, Mariana addressed a crowd of thousands. Her voice rang clear and unwavering. "We are all ghosts. We are the resistance. The fight never ends." The crowd erupted in applause, chants echoing into the night. Alejandro stood beside her, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "The ghosts live," he said softly, "and Mexico City, with all its noise, chaos, and beauty, continued to breathe, carrying forward the story of Los Fantasmas." Movement sparked by Los Fantasmas began to take root globally. Activists in cities as far as Berlin, Lagos, and São Paulo adopted their tactics. They painted the ghost symbol on walls, chanted their words, and carried their philosophy into new struggles. Alejandro and Mariana had become more than rebels. They were architects of a worldwide resistance in Mexico City. The movement grew stronger. Neighborhoods became centers of cultural and political activism. In Tipito, a labyrinth of alleyways became a meeting ground for young organizers. In La Roma, cafes became hubs of strategy. The movement was everywhere, alive in the people. Alejandro and Mariana moved silently among them, unseen but always present. They became mentors to the keepers of the ghosts. Training them in the art of resistance, they taught them to blend courage with strategy, passion with precision. But their greatest challenge loomed: a coalition of global powers, threatened by the rise of grassroots resistance, began to move against them. They operated in the shadows, using surveillance, propaganda, and manipulation to suppress dissent. Mariana called for a gathering in an abandoned metro station, its walls lined with murals and messages of hope. Activists from around the city arrived. The air was tense with anticipation. "We face a new enemy," Mariana said, her voice steady. "They are invisible, but their influence is everywhere. This battle will define the future." Alejandro stepped forward. "We have taught you to fight. Now we must teach you to endure." They launched a coordinated campaign. Digital infiltration, exposes, grassroots mobilization. Mexico City became a living battlefield, fought with information, art, and courage. The resistance spread, becoming unstoppable. Alejandro and Mariana, now legends in their own time, faded into the shadows, leaving behind a city transformed. Los Fantasmas were no longer just names. They were a movement, a philosophy, and an eternal force for justice. Over the years, Los Fantasmas evolved from a clandestine movement into a living philosophy that transcended borders and generations. Alejandro and Mariana, though rarely seen, became symbolic figures whose names were chanted in protests and painted across the walls of cities worldwide. From Rio de Janeiro to Cairo, from Paris to Manila, activists adopted their symbol, the stylized ghost, as an emblem of defiance against oppression and corruption. It became more than a symbol. It was a call to action, a creed that united disparate struggles into a shared movement. In Mexico City, Their influence was woven into the very fabric of urban life. Neighborhoods once plagued by fear now buzzed with activism. Public squares hosted art exhibits, poetry readings, and forums dedicated to the principles loss, phantasmas, embodied transparency, justice, solidarity. The city itself had become a living monument to resistance and to peace. Narrow alleyways echoed with the chants of protest, while in La Roma, cafes and bookstores became centers for organizing, teaching, and strategizing in murals depicted Alejandro and Mariana standing shoulder to shoulder, cloaked in shadow, their eyes fierce and determined, a reminder to every citizen that resistance was not only possible, but necessary. Keepers of the ghosts, the new generation of activists, became the lifeblood of the movement, trained in the arts of subterfuge, digital security, grassroots organizing, and strategic protest. They operated in cells spread across the city. Alejandro and Mariana, now elders of the movement, served as mentors from the shadows. They rarely appeared in public, preferring to guide the movement through encrypted channels, subtle interventions, and the careful cultivation of leaders. Their methods evolved as well. They understood that modern resistance required both tradition and innovation. The movement incorporated art, hacking, storytelling, and community action into a cohesive strategy that was difficult to track or suppress. But as Los Fantasma's influence grew, so too did the threats. They faced a coalition of global powers, governments, corporations. Intelligence agencies saw in the movement a challenge to their dominance. This coalition operated in secrecy, using surveillance, misinformation, and covert operations to dismantle resistance networks. They infiltrated activist groups, manipulated social media, and created false narratives designed to erode public trust. They knew the strength of Los Fantasmas lay in anonymity and solidarity, so they targeted both with precision. Mariana sensed the growing danger in the dead of night. She convened a clandestine council in an abandoned metro station beneath Mexico City. The walls were covered with murals and slogans, painted by generations of activists. Resistir es vivir, to resist is to live. The air was heavy with the sense of urgency as activists from all over the city gathered in secrecy. Mariana's voice rang out, steady and commanding. Our enemy has changed. They no longer fight in open battlefields. They fight in silence. In shadows they seek to control not only what we say, but what we think. This is a war for truth itself. Alejandro stepped forward, his aged face illuminated by the dim light. We have taught you how to fight now. We must teach you how to endure. Resistance is not a moment. It is a lifetime, and we must pass it on. The council agreed on a strategy that was as bold as it was dangerous. They launched coordinated campaigns across the city, digital infiltration of corrupt networks, mass leaks of incriminating evidence, orchestrated protests, and symbolic acts of art that challenged the narratives pushed by those in power. The movement operated in layers, making it impossible to dismantle completely. It was no longer just a battle in the streets. It was a battle in the mind. Mexico City became a living battlefield. Its heartbeat echoed with chants of defiance, its walls adorned with images of ghosts, reminders that the fight for justice was eternal. And yet, amidst the chaos, Alejandro and Mariana remained in the shadows, guiding without leading, teaching without showing their faces. They understood that their own disappearance was part of the strategy. The movement had to belong to the people, not to its founders. Years turned into decades lost. Phantasmas became more than a movement. They became a global philosophy of resistance. Alejandro and Mariana, now figures of myth, continued to guide the keepers of the ghosts. Their message spread through underground networks, encrypted channels, and the collective memory of countless activists. Every mural, every chant, every act of defiance became part of the living legacy they had built in Mexico City. The story of Los Fantasmas was passed down like a sacred tradition. It was taught in universities, discussed in cafes, and celebrated in festivals. Children grew up knowing the name, Understanding it as more than a tale of rebellion, it was a lesson in courage, solidarity, and the unending struggle for truth. Mariana and Alejandro, though unseen, became eternal guardians, their legacy engraved into the soul of the city. And so, in the labyrinth of Mexico City, the spirit of Los Fantasmas lived on, unseen, unstoppable, and eternal. The movement that Alejandro and Mariana had nurtured now pulsed through the arteries of cities around the world, from Santiago to Istanbul, Johannesburg to Seoul. The ghost symbol became a rallying cry for those fighting corruption, injustice, and oppression. Los Fantasmas was no longer confined to a single city. They were a worldwide network of resistance, bound together by a shared philosophy and a commitment to truth. In Mexico City, the influence of Los Fantasmas was woven into everyday life. Activists organized teach-ins in public plazas, artists painted murals that told the history of resistance, and musicians wrote songs that kept their story alive. Every corner of the city whispered fragments of their legend into community centers operated as safe havens for activism. In La Roma, art collectives grew into powerful movements that challenged the status quo. The city had become a living testament to the power of collective action. The keepers of the ghosts, trained under Alejandro and Mariana's guidance, became the lifeblood of the movement. They were organized in decentralized cells, making them resilient to infiltration. They operated in both physical and digital realms, using art, hacktivism, and grassroots organizing to confront oppression. They embodied the principle that resistance was not only a fight, but a way of life. Yet, with every victory came a greater challenge. A coalition of governments and corporations, threatened by the spread of grassroots movements, began to fight back. They used surveillance, disinformation, and covert operations to undermine resistance efforts. They sought to dismantle the network of Los Fantasmas before it could become unstoppable. Mariana sensed the mounting danger and called for a summit of the keepers in a concealed location beneath the city. The meeting was held in a cavernous underground hall, adorned with murals and slogans of resistance. Activists from all over gathered, their faces lit by flickering lanterns. Mariana addressed them with quiet urgency. "We are facing a war unlike any before. Our enemy does not fight openly. They fight in shadows. They will attempt to control not just our actions, but our thoughts. We must adapt." Alejandro stepped forward, his voice carrying decades of wisdom. "Our mission is not only to resist, but to endure. Resistance is not a moment. It is an eternal commitment." The council agreed on a multifaceted strategy. They would wage their battle on multiple fronts: digital infiltration, mass protests, symbolic acts of art, and grassroots mobilization. Mexico City became a living canvas of defiance, its streets a testament to the persistence of the movement. The movement endured, growing stronger with every challenge. Los Fantasmas became a legend, their story told in murals, songs, lectures, and whispered conversations in cafes. Alejandro and Mariana remained unseen, their presence felt in the heartbeat of the city and the courage of its people. On the anniversary of their first mission, crowds gathered at the Zócalo under a mural depicting Alejandro and Mariana cloaked in shadow. A voice cried out, "Los fantasmas viven!" The ghosts live. In the years that followed, the legend of Los Fantasmas became an integral part of Mexico City's identity, a living mythology that pulsed through the streets. Every generation learned the story anew, not merely as history, but as a blueprint for action. Alejandro and Mariana's faces, once hidden in shadow, became icons of defiance, painted on walls, printed on banners, and carved into murals. The movement continued to evolve. Los Fantasmas network expanded, connecting with grassroots movements across the globe. They collaborated with activists in cities far and wide, sharing strategies, technology, and intelligence. Digital platforms became safe havens for organizing. Encrypted networks became the arteries through which information flowed. Their mission had grown. It was no longer just a fight for Mexico City. but a fight for the integrity of truth itself. In the heart of Mexico City, neighborhoods transformed. Tepito became a nexus of activism, hosting workshops on digital security and civil resistance. La Roma became a hub for cultural resistance, where art was both protest and instruction. Cayocanes plazas echoed with poetry, music, and gatherings that kept the spirit of Los Fantasmas alive. The keepers of the ghosts trained tirelessly, mastering the arts of strategy, encryption, and community organizing. Alejandro and Mariana, now wise elders of the movement, guided them through whispers and encrypted messages. They knew that the survival of Los Fantasmas depended on the ability of the next generation to carry the flame, but the battle was far from over. A powerful coalition, unseen but omnipresent, sought to extinguish the movement. They manipulated economies, controlled media narratives, and infiltrated networks. It was a war fought in silence. In shadows, Mariana convened a final council of the keepers beneath the city in a hidden chamber. Surrounded by murals of past struggles, she spoke. Our enemy is stronger, but they are not invincible. We fight not because victory is certain, but because resistance is necessary. Alejandro, standing beside her, added, "The ghosts are eternal. We fight not for ourselves, but for the generations yet to come." The council agreed on a plan that would ensure the movement's survival. Decentralized cells would continue the work, carrying forward the spirit of Los Fantasmas. The symbol of the ghost would become a universal emblem of resistance. On a night when the city was alive with whispers of change, Mariana and Alejandro vanished once more. They left behind no names, no faces, only a legacy. Mexico City breathed on, alive with the pulse of rebellion. As decades passed, Los Fantasmas transformed from a movement into a living force embedded in the very essence of Mexico City. Alejandro and Mariana's story became a myth retold in the streets, taught in classrooms, and passed down through generations. The city itself had become their monument. Every mural, every chant, every gathering, a testament to the enduring spirit they had created. Their influence spread beyond borders. Activist cells, inspired by Los Fantasmas, appeared in cities across the world, united by the same principles: courage, solidarity, and the relentless pursuit of truth. The ghost symbol became an international emblem of defiance, appearing in protests from Cairo to Berlin, Rio to Mumbai, and Mexico City. Tepito became a sanctuary of activism, hosting underground schools where young organizers learned the art of resistance. La Roma blossomed as a cultural center, with art exhibitions and performances dedicated to preserving the spirit of the movement. Cayocanes plazas were alive with poetry, music, and discussions about justice. The keepers of the ghosts continued the work. Alejandro and Mariana began. They operated in cells across the city, trained in strategy, encryption, and community organizing. Alejandro and Mariana guided them from the shadows, ensuring the movement adapted to changing times. Yet the struggle never ended. A shadow coalition of global powers continued to wage war against grassroots movements, using surveillance, misinformation, and infiltration to suppress dissent. But Los Fantasmas persisted. In a final gathering beneath the city, Mariana addressed, "The Keeper's resistance is eternal. We fight not for ourselves, but for those who will come after us." Alejandro, beside her, added, "Our time has passed, but the ghosts will never die." They vanished into the labyrinth of Mexico City, leaving behind no trace but their legacy. The legend of Los Fantasmas continued to grow, not just as a story, but as a living, breathing movement that intertwined itself into the soul of Mexico City over decades. Their philosophy became a doctrine, embraced by countless communities. The ghost symbol, once a secret sign of resistance, transformed into an emblem recognized worldwide, painted on walls, stitched into clothing, engraved in murals, enchanted at protests. The spirit of Los Fantasmas was no longer tied to Alejandro and Mariana alone. It belonged to every soul who dared to stand against corruption and injustice in the city itself. Their influence was tangible. Tepito, once a neighborhood known for its struggle and survival, evolved into the beating heart of grassroots activism. Hidden workshops taught young people the skills of digital security, strategic organizing, and the art of civil resistance. These workshops were never advertised publicly. They were whispered about, accessed through trusted networks. La Roma became a vibrant hub for cultural resistance, where art collectives curated exhibitions that told the story of struggle through music, painting, and performance. Kaioken turned into a gathering place for poets, writers, and activists, their voices rising in plazas and cafes in homage to Los Fantasmas. Keepers of the Ghosts had become an international network, their reach extending far beyond Mexico City. They worked in decentralized cells to remain resilient against infiltration, each cell empowered to operate independently, while connected by shared principles and encrypted communication. Alejandro and Mariana had ensured that no single person held the entire movement. It was a living organism, capable of evolving beyond their presence. They trained new generations in the art of resistance. Not just how to fight, but how to endure. Resistance was not a single battle. It was an ongoing commitment that required adaptability, knowledge, and courage. Alejandro and Mariana's teachings were embedded in encrypted digital archives, passed along to trusted keepers, who in turn adapted the lessons for their communities. But as the movement flourished, so did the forces arrayed against it. An unseen coalition of governments and corporations emerged, united in their determination to crush grassroots resistance. They wielded surveillance, disinformation, legal manipulation, and covert operations to dismantle networks. Their influence was global, their methods insidious, and their reach profound. The Keepers knew they had to evolve their strategies. Mariana convened a council beneath the city in a chamber lined with murals of past struggles. Activists from around Mexico City gathered, their voices united in the shadows. Mariana spoke with urgency. Our enemy fights without revealing themselves. They infiltrate, distort, and control narratives. We must be smarter. We must be invisible. Alejandro's voice rang through the chamber. We have taught you how to fight now. We must teach you how to last. Resistance is eternal, and so must we be. The council agreed on a plan of action, a multifaceted campaign involving digital infiltration, public mobilization, symbolic acts of defiance, and the expansion of grassroots education. Mexico City became a living battlefield, with every alleyway, square, and wall a testament to resistance. The movement's presence was felt in both the visible and invisible, in the rallies that filled the streets and the encrypted channels where strategy was born years past. And Los Fantasmas became a global phenomenon. Their philosophy spread through underground channels to activists in cities as far as Nairobi, Berlin, Rio de Janeiro, and New York. In each place, the ghost symbol became a mark of solidarity and a declaration of defiance. In Mexico City, Alejandro and Mariana faded further into legend. They became whispers in the wind, names spoken with reverence and determination. Their presence was felt. Even without sight, the movement had become self-sustaining. Every year, on the anniversary of their first mission, thousands gathered at the Zocalo murals depicting Alejandro and Mariana adorned the city, their faces half hidden in shadow. Forever watching. Beneath one mural was inscribed the phrase, Los Fantasmas, even the ghosts, live. The years following solidified. Los Fantasmas is not only a movement, but a living legacy. Alejandro and Mariana had long vanished from public view, yet their presence lingered like a shadow over the city. Tepito's narrow streets thrummed with the energy of youth-led resistance. La Roma's walls bore intricate murals of ghostly figures, and Kaioken became a hub of poetry, music, and discourse about truth and justice. Every neighborhood, every alley, every public square had become part of the narrative. The Keepers of the Ghosts evolved into a sophisticated network. They operated globally, Collaborating with activists in distant cities, they trained in encryption, cyber defense, grassroots mobilization, and the art of nonviolent disruption. Alejandro and Mariana's teachings became the foundation of their strategy, a guiding code preserved in hidden digital archives. These teachings were passed down orally and through clandestine gatherings, ensuring their survival beyond any single generation. The coalition arrayed against them grew ever more sophisticated governments. Multinational corporations and shadow networks worked together to undermine the movement. They flooded media with propaganda, manipulated digital platforms, and conducted covert operations. Resistance became a war fought not just in the streets, but in the very fabric of reality. In the face of this, the keepers adapted. They shifted to decentralized models, ensuring no single cell could be destroyed without the movement surviving. They turned every street into a potential arena of resistance, and every community into a sanctuary for dissent. In one decisive gathering beneath the city, Mariana addressed the keepers. "Our mission is eternal," she said. "The fight is not just for today, but for every tomorrow that will come. You are the keepers now." Alejandro, standing beside her, nodded. "We have taught you to fight now. Teach the world to endure." Mexico City continued to breathe resistance. The ghost symbol became more than an icon. It was a language, a creed. Children grew up learning it as a story of courage. Activists wore it like armor, and in every whisper of the wind through the city, there was a promise. Los Fantasmas lived on, so they did, in the art on the walls, in the chants, in the streets, in the quiet acts of defiance. Los Fantasmas became eternal, an unbroken thread woven into the heart of Mexico City and into the soul of the world. The legend of Los Fantasmas continued to spread, transcending language, borders, and generations. Alejandro and Mariana, though absent from sight, became eternal figures in the consciousness of the oppressed. Their story was told in whispered conversations, in songs, and in the vibrant art that covered the walls of cities around the globe, from the streets of Lagos to the plazas of Athens, from the cafes of Buenos Aires to the underground networks of Jakarta. The ghost symbol became a universal emblem of resistance in Mexico City. The legacy lived in every neighborhood. Tepito thrummed with clandestine workshops, teaching strategy and security. La Roma flourished as a cultural sanctuary, where art and activism merged. Cayocan's plazas became forums for discussion, where poets, musicians, and activists shared visions of a just world. The city itself had become a living archive of the resistance. The keepers of the ghosts trained tirelessly, passing Alejandro and Mariana's teachings to the next generation. They mastered the arts of encryption, strategy, and organization, turning every street, every digital network, every whisper into a thread in the fabric of resistance. But the opposition had not disappeared. Powerful forces continued to operate in silence, seeking to dismantle the movement. Surveillance, misinformation, and infiltration became their tools. Yet Los Fantasmas endured, adapting and evolving in a hidden chamber beneath the city. Mariana addressed the keepers one final time. "Resistance is eternal. We do this not for ourselves, but for every generation that comes after us." Alejandro stood beside her, adding softly, "The ghosts are everywhere. They live in the hearts of those who refuse to be silent." The keepers dispersed, carrying forward the mission. Mexico City pulsed with the energy of their work. The ghost symbol appeared everywhere on walls, in song, in protest. It became a reminder that the fight for truth was never over. Decades later, the story of Los Fantasmas had become inseparable from the identity of Mexico City itself. Their symbol, once a clandestine mark of defiance, was now a universal sign of courage, appearing in protests, art, literature, and song, from murals painted in hidden alleys to performances in grand plazas. Their presence was a constant reminder that resistance was not a moment, but a way of life. Tepito remained a heart of resistance, its labyrinthine streets filled with workshops, meetings, and the quiet hum of organizing. La Roma had become a cultural center for dissent, where art, music, and activism intersected. Kyokan's plazas were alive with the voices of poets, musicians, and activists keeping the memory of Los Fantasmas alive. The Keepers of the Ghosts had grown into an international network. Their influence spreading to cities across the globe, they carried Alejandro and Mariana's philosophy forward, adapting their methods to the challenges of the modern age. Encryption, grassroots organizing, art, and storytelling became the tools of resistance. Opposition forces continued their quiet war against dissent. But Los Fantasmas evolved in response. Resistance became an art form. Decentralized and resilient, every neighborhood became a bastion of activism. Every act of defiance, a thread in the tapestry of resistance. Mariana and Alejandro, now figures of legend. Guided from the shadows, they were gone from the public eye. But their teachings lived on in the keepers, in the streets, and in the hearts of people everywhere. On a night when the city seemed to hold its breath, the ghost symbol appeared on walls across Mexico City, uniting voices in defiance. Somewhere, unseen, Alejandro and Mariana watched. They knew their story would never end. As the years turned into decades, the story of Los Fantasmas became an enduring legend told in every corner of Mexico City. The movement had become woven into the fabric of the city's identity. Murals of ghostly figures adorned walls. Posters bearing the symbol appeared in hidden places, and whispers of resistance filled cafes, markets, and streets. Alejandro and Mariana had vanished from sight, but their presence remained alive in the spirit of the people. The Keepers of the Ghosts had multiplied, spreading beyond Mexico City into the global stage. Their network was now vast, connecting activists from countless cities, each inspired by the philosophy of resistance that Alejandro and Mariana had forged. They trained in strategy, encryption, and grassroots organization, ensuring the movement could endure. Despite any threat, Tepito remained the heart of the movement, a place where resistance was taught and lived daily. La Roma continued to flourish as a cultural hub for dissent, and Kyokan was a living archive of protest, where art, music, and activism blended seamlessly. Despite the persistence of powerful forces seeking to crush dissent, Los Fantasmas adapted and thrived. They operated in shadows and in light, their work becoming an art form. The city itself became a canvas of defiance. And the anniversary of Los Fantasmas' first act, crowds gathered at the Zocalo under the gaze of a giant mural depicting Alejandro and Mariana. A chant rose. Los Fantasmas viven. The ghosts live. Somewhere unseen, Alejandro and Mariana listened. They knew the story was no longer theirs, alone. As the decades unfurled, Los Fantasmas became far more than a movement. They became a living mythology, a philosophy etched into the heart of Mexico City and whispered across the globe. Alejandro and Mariana's names had transcended their mortal lives, becoming symbols of resistance in a world that seemed increasingly determined to suppress dissent. The ghost symbol was no longer just a mark of secrecy. It was an emblem of courage, unity, and endurance. In the labyrinthine streets remained a crucible for resistance. Workshops on digital security, grassroots organizing, and civil disobedience became a regular part of life. Young leaders emerged from these workshops, carrying the legacy forward, teaching others, and expanding the movement. La Roma had transformed into a thriving cultural hub, where artists painted murals of spectral figures and activists staged performances that blended art with politics. Kyokan's plazas became living archives, filled with poetry, music, and impassioned debates about justice and freedom. The Keepers of the Ghosts had become a vast, decentralized network. They operated in cells, interconnected yet independent, ensuring resilience against infiltration. Each cell was trained in Alejandro and Mariana's philosophy, a code of resistance that emphasized adaptability, solidarity, and the importance of remaining unseen. Communication flowed through encrypted channels, and the movement's strategies evolved with the changing times. Their influence reached far beyond Mexico City, across continents. Activists adopted the ghost symbol as a universal sign of resistance from the streets of Cairo to the plazas of Athens, from the favelas of Rio de Janeiro to the neighborhoods of Johannesburg. Los Fantasmas inspired acts of courage. The movement's reach became global, tied together not by geography but by a shared commitment to truth. But as the movement grew, so did the forces arrayed against it. A covert coalition of powerful interests worked tirelessly to dismantle Los Fantasmas' surveillance, propaganda, infiltration. These were their weapons. They aimed not just to suppress dissent, but to erase the very idea of resistance in response. The keepers adapted. They embraced decentralization, transforming every community into a potential node of resistance. They used art, music, education, and encrypted networks as tools of defiance. Every act of creation became an act of rebellion. One night, Mariana convened a council of the keepers beneath the city. In a chamber lined with murals of past struggles, activists from across Mexico City gathered in silence, the air thick with anticipation. Mariana spoke, her voice steady. "We do not fight because victory is certain. We fight because resistance itself is the act of freedom. We fight so that those who come after us will know they can stand." Alejandro, standing beside her, added, "We have given you the tools now. Take them, teach them, live them. We will not be here forever, but the ghosts will." The council agreed to a strategy that would carry Los Fantasmas into the future. Decentralized resistance cells, cultural interventions, education, digital security, and a commitment to anonymity. The years passed, and Los Fantasmas became a legend, living in the heartbeat of the city. Every street, mural, song, and whisper carried their essence. Alejandro and Mariana faded from view, but their teachings endured. The ghost symbol became a universal language of defiance. In the years that followed, Los Fantasmas became not just a story, but a living tradition. Alejandro and Mariana had disappeared from the streets, but their influence was everywhere. The ghost symbol was found in alleyways, on protest banners, in underground publications, and in digital graffiti across networks invisible to those who sought to erase them. Their philosophy, resistance through unity, secrecy, and creativity, became the core of a global network. Tepito remained a crucible for change, its winding streets filled with workshops, small gatherings, and murals that told the stories of countless struggles. La Roma had become a sanctuary for cultural resistance, where art and activism merged seamlessly. Cayocanes plazas were alive with debate and expression, with poets and musicians keeping the spirit of Los Fantasmas alive. The keepers of the ghosts expanded their reach, from underground spaces in Mexico City to remote digital forums. They coordinated, adapted, and thrived. They passed down Alejandro and Mariana's teachings, ensuring that each generation learned the code of resistance. Global networks of resistance now bore the ghost symbol, a mark of solidarity that transcended borders. From the rooftops of Istanbul to the streets of Cape Town, from protest walls in Buenos Aires to the digital landscapes of Hong Kong, Los Fantasmas lived on. But the opposition was relentless. Powerful forces continued to adapt, using surveillance, propaganda, and infiltration to combat the movement. Yet Los Fantasmas adapted faster. Every act of art became resistance. Every encrypted message was a declaration of defiance and a final act of legacy. Mariana addressed the keepers in a hidden chamber beneath the city. Resistance is not a single battle, but an eternal struggle. We are all ghosts. We live in the courage of those who dare to stand. Alejandro, beside her, whispered, "Our story is your story. Carry it." The movement dispersed into the world, carried forward by countless unseen hands. Mexico City pulsed with life, its walls and plazas echoing with the call of the ghost sand. So, Los Fantasmas lived forever, unseen, unbroken, immortal, and a beacon for all who refused to be silenced. Generations passed, and Los Fantasmas became more than a movement. They became a culture, a philosophy woven into the fabric of global resistance. Alejandro and Mariana's disappearance only deepened their legend. They became myths whispered among activists, stories passed down as lessons of courage and endurance. Their names adorned murals. Their symbol became a universal mark of dissent, and their philosophy spread far beyond Mexico City into resistance became a way of life. Hidden workshops taught young organizers not only the tactics of activism, but also the ethics of their struggle in La Roma. Art and protest merged into a living tapestry, each mural and performance carrying the spirit of Los Fantasmas Cayocan remained a gathering place for the exchange of ideas, a place where the past and present met in song, poetry, and debate. The keepers of the ghosts had grown into a global network, their decentralized cells operating in harmony. Despite their independence, they shared knowledge, encrypted strategies, and cultural expressions of resistance. Their work had become an art form, a symphony of defiance played in cities across the world. The opposition continued to evolve, employing new tools to suppress dissent. Yet Los Fantasmas, adapted resistance, was no longer a single act, but an endless movement, existing in the streets, in art, in the digital sphere. Every wall painted, every song sung, every encrypted message sent was a continuation of their legacy. On the anniversary of their first mission, the world joined in a silent tribute across continents. People lit candles, painted ghost symbols, and gathered in plazas to remember. In Mexico City, under a mural of Alejandro and Mariana cloaked in shadow, thousands raised their voices in unison. Los Fantasmas viven. The ghosts live. Somewhere in the shadows, Alejandro and Mariana listened. Knowing their story had become eternal, they had sown a seed that could never be uprooted. As the years unfurled into decades, the legend of Los Fantasmas became an eternal part of Mexico City's soul. The movement Alejandro and Mariana had begun was no longer bound to their presence. It had become a living tradition, taught in whispers, sung in songs, painted on walls. Their symbol, once a sign of secrecy, was now a universal emblem of defiance. Tepeto's streets were alive with the spirit of resistance, a labyrinth where art, activism, and survival intertwined. Workshops and clandestine schools trained new keepers in the arts of protest, encryption, and strategy. La Roma had grown into a beacon of cultural resistance, where the arts became acts of defiance. In Cayocan, plazas transformed into open forums for discussion, poetry, and music, keeping alive the ethos of Los Fantasmas. Keepers of the Ghosts had become a vast, decentralized network spanning continents. From the rooftops of Istanbul to the streets of Johannesburg, the ghost symbol became a rallying cry. They communicated through encrypted channels, passed down the teachings of Alejandro and Mariana, and adapted their strategies to new challenges. Opposition forces remained relentless. Surveillance, propaganda, infiltration, these were the tools they wielded. Yet Los Fantasmas thrived, evolving their methods, turning every act of art and every whispered word into resistance. On a night steeped in symbolism, Mariana called together the keepers beneath the city, surrounded by murals of past struggles. She said, "We are all ghosts now. The fight is not ours alone. It belongs to everyone who chooses to stand." Alejandro added softly, "Our bodies may vanish, but the ghosts remain." Mexico is a country of breathtaking landscapes, ancient civilizations, vibrant traditions, and warm people. Yet behind the mariachi music, colorful markets, and bustling cities, there exists another Mexico, a Mexico shaped by crime, corruption, and survival. The phrase Mexico creamy stories is not just about shocking headlines or sensational cases. It is a reflection of the way crime has intertwined itself with history, politics, and everyday life in this nation. To understand Mexico's crime stories is to step into a world of cartels, corruption, legends, tragedies, and resilience. From infamous cartel leaders like Joaquin El Chapo Guzman to unsolved mysteries that haunt local towns. Mexico's crime landscape is vast, layered, and deeply human. This long exploration will cover the most notorious criminal events, the rise of drug cartels, everyday struggles with violence, the corruption that fuels it, and the remarkable resilience of communities who keep fighting for peace. Chapter 1. The origins of organized crime in Mexico. Crime in Mexico didn't appear overnight. Its roots trace back to decades of inequality, poverty, and political corruption. By the mid-20th century, Mexico was already a key player in the drug trade. First came marijuana and heroin production, largely controlled by small local groups. Later, as cocaine demand surged in the United States during the 1980s, Mexico became the perfect corridor. The Colombian cartels initially dominated, but as U.S. enforcement cracked down on routes through the Caribbean, Mexican smugglers gained more control. They were not just couriers anymore, they became kings. One of the first major groups was the Guadalajara cartel, run by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. In the 1980s, known as El Padrino, the Godfather, Gallardo centralized Mexico's drug operations and built connections with Colombia's Medellin cartel. But power in Mexico never stays with one group for long. The arrest of Gallardo in 1989 fractured the cartel into regional groups: the Sinaloa cartel, the Tijuana cartel, and the Juarez cartel. This fragmentation laid the foundation for decades of bloody rivalries. Chapter 2. The legend of El Chapo. Perhaps no name is more synonymous with Mexican crime than Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Rising from poverty in the mountains of Sinaloa, El Chapo became the face of the Sinaloa cartel. He was not only feared for his violence, but admired by some as a folk hero, a man of the people, who built roads and schools in his hometown. El Chapo's story reads like a crime novel. Prison escapes. Twice, he managed to escape from maximum security prisons, once hidden in a laundry cart, 2001, and later through a mile-long underground tunnel, 2015. Global empire. At its peak, his cartel controlled up to 80% of the cocaine entering the U.S. and earned billions annually. Capture. His final capture in 2016 and extradition to the U.S. marked the end of an era. Though the Sinaloa cartel remains powerful today for many Mexicans, El Chapo symbolizes both the failures of the government and the blurred line between villain and legend. Chapter 3. The rise of Los Zetas. While the Sinaloa cartel used networks and alliances, Los Zetas introduced terror as their trademark. Originally formed by elite military defectors in the late 1990s, Los Zetas brought military discipline, advanced weaponry, and ruthless violence to the cartel world. They became infamous for mass killings, beheadings, and public displays of violence meant to spread fear. Some of their worst crimes shocked the world. San Fernando Massacre, 2010. 72 migrants were kidnapped and murdered because they refused to work for the cartel. Casino Royale attack, 2011. Armed men set fire to a casino in Monterrey, killing 52 people. The brutality of Los Zetas changed the nature of organized crime in Mexico. Violence wasn't just about business, it became a weapon of psychological warfare. Chapter 4. Everyday Mexico crime beyond cartels. While cartels dominate headlines, Mexico's crime stories are not only about drug lords. Many crimes affect ordinary citizens daily. Kidnapping. Mexico has one of the highest kidnapping rates in the world. Both wealthy and working-class families fear abductions, sometimes by organized groups, sometimes by corrupt police extortion. Small businesses are often forced to pay protection money to gangs, a practice known as cobro de piso. Refusing to pay can mean death. Corruption. Police officers and politicians are often implicated in helping cartels or covering up crimes. This erodes public trust and makes justice elusive. These everyday struggles mean that crime in Mexico is not just a headline issue. It's a constant reality shaping how people live. Chapter 5. Famous crime stories that shook Mexico. 1. The murder of Enrique Kiki Camarena in 1985. DA agent Kiki Camarena was kidnapped, tortured, and killed by the Guadalajara cartel. His death sparked outrage in the U.S. and led to massive crackdowns. His story later inspired the Netflix series Narcos, Mexico 2. The disappearance of the 43 students from Ayotzinapa, 2014. 43 students from a rural teachers' college disappeared in Guerrero. Investigations revealed possible involvement of both the cartel and local police. The case remains unsolved and symbolizes Mexico's crisis of justice. 3. La Barbie. The American cartel, boss Edgar Valdez, known as La Barbie, was a U.S.-born drug trafficker who rose to power in Mexico. His story highlights the cross-border nature of organized crime. Chapter 6. The narco-culture. Crime in Mexico has also influenced culture. Narco corridos, drug ballads, celebrate cartel leaders like folk heroes. These songs tell stories of power, violence, and riches, often glorifying criminals in the eyes of youth. Television has followed suit. Series like Narcos Mexico, El Señor de los Cielos, and Queen of the South dramatize cartel life for some. These shows humanize the criminals. For others, they romanticize violence. Sivan. Fashion has been influenced. Flashy jewelry, luxury cars, and expensive clothes are associated with narco-culture for young people in poor areas. The cartel lifestyle can appear more achievable than a legitimate career. Chapter 7. Women in crime. While men dominate cartel leadership, women play significant roles, sometimes as leaders, sometimes as victims. Sandra Avila Beltran, La Reina del Pacifico, a notorious female drug trafficker who earned her nickname as the Queen of the Pacific. Victims of violence. Femicide is a major issue in Mexico, with thousands of women killed each year in crimes often linked to organized crime or domestic violence. Women's crime stories reflect both empowerment and tragedy within Mexico's criminal landscape. 8. Border stories. Crime between Mexico and the U.S.-Mexico border is the stage for countless crime stories. Cartels smuggle drugs north, while weapons and money flow south. Cities like Tijuana, Ciudad Juarez, and Nuevo Laredo have seen years of cartel wars. Ciudad Juarez, once called the murder capital of the world, suffered over 3,000 murders in 2010 alone due to cartel battles. Many of its victims were young women working in factories, giving rise to international outrage. Chapter 9. The resilience of communities amid the chaos. There are stories of hope. Communities form self-defense groups, auto defenses to fight back against cartels. Journalists risk their lives to uncover the truth. Families of missing people form organizations to search for mass graves. Moving story is of mothers who call themselves Las Rastreadoras, the searchers. Armed with nothing but sticks and shovels, they search the countryside for the remains of their missing loved ones. Their courage is a powerful reminder that Mexico's crime stories are also about resilience. 10. The future of Mexico's crime stories. Mexico's crime future remains uncertain. On one hand, cartels are fragmented, but still powerful. On the other, public anger against corruption and violence grows stronger. International cooperation, police reform, and economic opportunities are crucial to reducing crime, but perhaps the most powerful weapon against crime is the determination of ordinary Mexicans who refuse to accept a life ruled by fear. Mexico is a land of contradictions, where vibrant culture, ancient traditions, and breathtaking landscapes stand side by side with stories of blood, betrayal, and survival. To understand Mexico's crime stories is to walk a tightrope between myth and reality, between folk legends and unspeakable tragedies. The roots of organized crime in Mexico stretch back to the rise of the Guadalajara cartel in the 1980s under Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, a man so powerful he was called El Padrino, the Godfather. His arrest shattered his empire into rival groups, sparking the birth of the Sinaloa and Juarez cartels. From those ashes rose Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, whose story reads like a Hollywood thriller Twice he escaped maximum security prisons, once hidden in a laundry cart, and later through a mile-long tunnel carved beneath his cell. Yet behind the daring escapes lay rivers of blood, as his Sinaloa cartel fought rivals for dominance. If El Chapo became a legend, the Zetas became monsters formed by defected special forces. They weaponized terror, massacring migrants and torching casinos, spreading fear as much as drugs. But Mexico's crime stories are not only about cartel bosses. They're about the ordinary people trapped in their shadows in countless towns. Small businesses pay extortion money just to survive. Families live in fear of kidnappings, and police corruption leaves justice out of reach. Some cases scarred the nation permanently, like the murder of DEH and Enrique Kiki Camarena in 1985, the disappearance of 43 students in Guerrero in 2014, or the countless women killed in Ciudad Juarez when the city was branded the murder capital of the world. Crime has even seeped into culture, with narco corridos, ballads that glorify drug lords playing on radios, and TV series dramatizing their lives, blurring the line between villain and hero. Yet, amid the darkness, stories of resilience shine through. Mothers digging in deserts with shovels, searching for their missing children. Communities forming self-defense groups to protect their villages. Journalists risking everything to expose the truth. Mexico's crime stories are more than headlines. They are tales of pain, survival, and defiance. They remind us that while cartels rule with violence and corruption erodes trust, the spirit of ordinary Mexicans, the mothers who search, the families who endure, the communities who refuse to be broken, remains unshaken. Mexico's crime stories cannot be told without acknowledging the strange duality of admiration and fear that surrounds figures like Joaquin El Chapo Guzman in his home region of Sinaloa. Some view him as a Robin Hood figure, a man who built roads, schools, and provided jobs in places where the government had long been absent for others. He is the symbol of unrelenting violence, a man whose empire soaked the nation in blood. His escapes from prison became global spectacles, embarrassing the Mexican state and turning him into a legend. But behind the myth of El Chapo were countless families shattered by cartel wars, communities displaced, and cities turned into killing fields. The larger-than-life image of men like him shows how crime in Mexico does not just happen in the shadows. It often dominates the national conversation, shaping politics, music, and even identity. But El Chapo is only one chapter in a much darker book. The rise of Los Zetas changed the rules of violence in Mexico forever. Where other cartels used bribery and intimidation, the Zetas thrived on brutality. They left bodies hanging from bridges, beheaded rivals, and committed massacres that shocked the world. In 2010, 72 migrants traveling northward, kidnapped and murdered by the Zetas in San Fernando because they refused to work for the cartel. A year later, 52 people died when the group torched the Casino Royale in Monterrey. These were not just business decisions, they were acts of terror designed to send a message. The Zetas would stop at nothing for ordinary citizens. These displays of horror transformed daily life into a nightmare, where even stepping outside could mean being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The story of crime in Mexico is also the story of corruption for decades. Law enforcement and political systems have been infiltrated by criminal money. Entire police forces have been accused of working hand in hand with cartels in some towns. Citizens whisper that it is safer to negotiate with criminals than to trust the authorities. This corruption not only shields powerful traffickers, but also leaves ordinary families. Abandoned kidnapping has become a booming underground industry, with victims ranging from wealthy businessmen to working-class fathers and even school children. Extortion, known as cobro de piso, forces small shop owners and taco stand vendors to pay for protection or face deadly consequences for many Mexicans. The crime story is not about infamous drug lords, but about these quiet daily battles of trying to survive in a system where both criminals and police can be predators. Some crimes, however, are so shocking that they haunt the entire nation. One of these is the case of the 43 missing students from Ayotzinapa. In 2014, young men training to be teachers, many from poor rural families, boarded buses one night and vanished. Investigations revealed that local police handed them over to a cartel. But the exact truth remains obscured by lies, cover-ups, and silence for years. Their mothers and fathers have marched with pictures of their sons, demanding answers from a government that offers only uncertainty. This tragedy is not just a single case, it represents the thousands of missing people across Mexico, each one leaving behind a family still searching, still grieving the disappeared. Are perhaps the most painful crime story of all, because they exist in limbo, neither alive nor officially dead, forever absenteed amid all the pain. Mexico is also filled with stories of courage. In Sinaloa, Michoacan, and Guerrero, communities have formed auto defenses, self-defense groups to protect their towns from cartels when the state failed to do so. Mothers have created organizations like Los Res, arming themselves with sticks, shovels, and sheer determination as they comb deserts and fields for the remains of their missing children. Journalists, despite knowing the risks, continue to publish investigations exposing links between politicians and criminal networks, even as Mexico remains one of the deadliest countries in the world for reporters. These acts of resistance are not always celebrated on the front pages, but they are the heartbeat of a society that refuses to surrender completely to violence. Narco culture has seeped deeply into Mexican life, reflecting both fascination and despair. Corridos, ballads that tell stories of drug lords and their exploits, play in villages and cities alike, sometimes banned by authorities, but still adored by fans. Television shows and movies portray cartel leaders as both villains and anti-heroes, creating a blurred moral landscape where young people, especially in poor areas, may see crime not as a curse, but as a path to respect and wealth. Flashy cars, golden rifles, and ostentatious mansions become symbols of success. While honest work often leads only to poverty, this cultural layer of crime is perhaps as dangerous as the cartels themselves, because it plants the seeds of admiration in the next generation. At the US-Mexico border, another chapter of crime plays out every day. Tijuana, Nuevo Laredo. These names became synonymous with violence as cartels battled for control of drug corridors. Ciudad Juarez, in particular, lived through a nightmare during the 2000s, when it was called the murder capital of the world. Factories employed thousands of women, many of whom disappeared under mysterious circumstances, fueling outrage both nationally and internationally. The border is not just a line dividing nations. It is a fault line where billions of dollars, tons of drugs, and rivers of blood converge for every package of cocaine that a family in Mexico pays a price in violence for every weapon smuggled south. A neighborhood faces a new wave of killings. In the end, Mexico's crime stories are not just about criminals. They are about survival. They are about families who refuse to forget their disappeared children, small towns that refuse to let fear define them, and a people who continue to dance, sing, and celebrate life, even in the shadow of violence. Mexico cannot be understood only through its crime, but its crime cannot be ignored. It is both a wound and a mirror, reflecting the failures of institutions, the greed of men, and the resilience of a nation. Behind every headline about cartels and corruption, there is a human story of loss, of courage, of hope. These stories remind us that crime may dominate the present, but it does not define the future. The story of crime in Mexico is also inseparable from geography. The country's rugged mountains, dense jungles, and vast deserts create landscapes that both shelter and empower criminal networks. In the Sierra Madre, remote villages are hidden among peaks where police rarely tread. These mountains are ideal for growing marijuana and opium poppies, crops that sustain entire communities, but also chain them to the narcotics trade. The Pacific coast, with its sprawling ports, allows containers of cocaine and methamphetamine to move discreetly toward the United States, Europe, and Asia along the Gulf. Oil pipelines are tapped by cartels that learned to steal fuel as easily as they smuggle drugs. Geography, more than just a backdrop, is a key character in Mexico's crime stories. It shapes how cartels survive, expand, and evade justice. Generational poverty adds another layer to the crisis in countless small towns. Opportunities are scarce, wages are low, and education often feels meaningless when violence dominates the streets for a young man. The sight of a cartel convoy, luxury trucks, gold-plated guns, and men respected through fear can be more persuasive than any classroom lecture. Many children grow up seeing traffickers as role models because they are the only people in their community who seem to have power. Some are recruited as lookouts, known as hellcones or hawks, paid a few pesos to report on police movement. Others are forced into violence, trained as sicarios, killers before they are old enough to vote. This cycle of poverty feeding into organized crime ensures that each generation inherits the scars of the last, making it nearly impossible to break free. But while cartels dominate much of the narrative, Mexico's crime stories also stretch into political scandals that reveal corruption at the highest levels. Governors, mayo, RS, generals, and even federal officials have been implicated in collusion with cartels. Some politicians rose to power with drug money funding their campaigns, while others allowed massacres to happen in exchange for bribes. This has created a chilling reality. Many Mexicans do not fear criminals as much as they fear the unholy alliance between criminals and the state. When police, soldiers, and politicians are complicit, who can the people trust? It is no coincidence that so many communities choose to take justice into their own hands, forming self-defense militias that patrol their towns with whatever weapons they can find. These groups are controversial. Some succeed in pushing cartels out, while others are infiltrated by the very criminals they swore to fit among. The most painful aspects of Mexico's crime stories is the phenomenon of disappearance. Unlike a murder, where families at least have a body to bury, disappearances leave wounds that never close across the country. Tens of thousands of people have vanished, some abducted by cartels, others kidnapped by corrupt officials, and many lost without explanation. Mothers become detectives, combing through morgues, prisons, and mass graves in search of clues. Groups, like Los Restauradores, represent the persistence of love in the face of horror. These women dig with bare hands, shovels, and hope, determined to find even fragments of bone that might reveal the fate of their children. Each discovery is bittersweet, a moment of closure, but also confirmation of a nightmare. The government often stands aside, offering little more than condolences, forcing these families to do the work of justice themselves. The shadow of crime even stretches across borders, shaping Mexico's relationship with the United States. While cartels move drugs north, American consumers create the demand that sustains the trade. At the same time, weapons bought legally in U.S. gun stores are smuggled south to arm cartel armies. It is a deadly exchange: cocaine for dollars, heroin for rifles, methamphetamine for ammunition. Border cities become the front line of this war. Ciudad Juarez, for example, lived through a decade of horror in the 2000s, with mass killings, kidnappings, and women disappearing at alarming rates. Yet even as international attention focused on Juarez, other cities like Reynosa, Tijuana, and Nuevo Laredo endured similar nightmares. The border is not just a physical barrier. It is a pressure point where two nations' failures meet, and ordinary families are crushed in between. Still, Mexico's crime stories are not without resilience. For every town silenced by fear, there is another that refuses to bow. Communities organize. Candlelight marches for the disappeared. Churches open their doors as sanctuaries for the threatened. Artists, musicians, and poets respond with works that denounce violence and keep memory alive. Journalists, despite facing assassination, continue to publish investigations, that expose corruption and hold the powerful accountable. Their bravery comes at an immense cost. Mexico is one of the most dangerous places in the world for reporters, but their persistence ensures that truth is not completely buried amid tragedy. Mexico's culture of life endures. Families celebrate Dia de los Muertos, honoring the dead not with silence but with music, food, and flowers. Children play soccer in dusty streets, their laughter echoing despite the presence of armed patrols nearby. Weddings, quinceañeras, and fiestas continue, proving that joy can survive even in the shadow of violence. This ability to celebrate life while living alongside death is itself a refusal to allow crime to steal the essence of what it means to be Mexican. Looking to the future, Mexico's crime stories remain unfinished. Cartels continue to splinter and evolve, diversifying into human trafficking, oil theft, and cybercrime. New generations of leaders emerge, replacing those captured or killed at the same time. Civic movements grow stronger, demanding transparency, reform, and justice. The government faces enormous challenges, reforming corrupt institutions, creating jobs to deter youth from joining cartels, and cooperating internationally to stem the flow of drugs and weapons. The outcome of these struggles will define not just Mexico's crime stories, but the very identity of the nation ultimately. Mexico's crime stories are not just tales of criminals, they are stories of survival. They are about mothers who keep searching, families who keep mourning, communities who keep resisting, and a country that keeps moving forward despite the shadows. They reveal the fragility of justice, the cost of corruption, and the resilience of love. For every act of brutality, there is an act of courage. For every life lost, there is a community determined to remember. These stories remind us that while violence may dominate today's headlines, it does not have to dictate tomorrow's future. Mexico is scarred, but not defeated, wounded but not broken. Its crime stories are tragic, yes, but also profoundly human. An eternal struggle between darkness and light. One of the most infamous figures in Mexico's crime history is Edgar Valdez Vil, better known as La Barbie. Born in Texas to a middle-class family, he earned his nickname for his light eyes and blonde hair, unusual traits in the Mexican underworld. His story illustrates how crime transcends borders. A high school football player turned drug trafficker, La Barbie climbed the ranks of the Beltran Leyva cartel, eventually running his own operations. Unlike many Mexican capos, he enjoyed flaunting his wealth and power in public, often photographed in designer clothes and luxury cars. His brashness caught international attention, and when he was captured in 2010, smiling confidently for cameras, he became a strange symbol of the cartel lifestyle. Arrogant, untouchable, and his trial and imprisonment in the United States revealed the reach of his network and the ways cartels used American citizens to advance their empires. Another chilling case is the wave of femicides in Ciudad Juarez, a phenomenon that began in the 1990s and still haunts Mexico today. Hundreds of women, many young and working in factories known as disappeared or were found murdered, often with signs of sexual violence. For years, authorities downplayed or ignored the crimes, blaming the victims themselves or attributing the deaths to random violence. Families protested, mothers marched with photos of their daughters, and international organizations demanded answers. Yet the killings continued, fueled by a toxic mix of misogyny, cartel violence, and corruption. The femicides of Juarez became one of Mexico's darkest crime stories, symbolizing the vulnerability of women in a society where justice often fails. It also drew attention to a broader epidemic. Mexico continues to face one of the highest rates of gender-based violence in the world, with women targeted both by organized crime and domestic abuse. Narco tunnels are another fascinating element of Mexico's criminal creativity, ingeniously engineered. These underground passageways stretch across the US-Mexico border, equipped with ventilation, lighting, and even rail tracks for moving drugs. El Chapo himself was notorious for using tunnels, not only to smuggle narcotics, but also to escape law enforcement. The 2015 prison break through a mile-long tunnel beneath his cell remains one of the most daring escapes in modern history, embarrassing the Mexican government and showcasing the cartel's resources. These tunnels represent more than ingenuity. They reflect how the cartels operate like corporations, investing in infrastructure, logistics, and innovation, often more effectively than the state itself. Every tunnel uncovered is proof of the sophistication of Mexico's criminal enterprises and the ongoing cat-and-mouse game between traffickers and authorities. The Beltran Leyva brothers add another bloody chapter to the saga. Once allies of El Chapo and part of the Sinaloa cartel, they split off in 2008 after feeling betrayed. Their feud with El Chapo sparked a wave of violence across Mexico. The brothers were known for their ruthlessness, especially Arturo Beltran Leyva, nicknamed El Jefe de Jefes, the boss of bosses. His death in a firefight with Mexican Marines in 2009 symbolized the government's escalating war against cartels. Yet it also triggered more bloodshed as factions fought to fill the vacuum. The collapse of the Beltran Leyva organization shows the recurring pattern of Mexican crime. The fall of one leader rarely brings peace, but instead unleashes new rivalries that consume even more lives equally. Disturbing is the role of kidnapping as a criminal enterprise in Mexico. Unlike drug trafficking, which relies on international networks, kidnapping directly preys on local communities. Criminal groups snatch businessmen, doctors, journalists, and even school children, demanding ransom payments that ruin families. In some cases, victims are never returned. Even after payments are made, stories circulate of individuals held for months in makeshift prisons, chained in basements or abandoned warehouses, surviving on scraps while their families desperately raise money. Kidnapping has become so normalized that many wealthy Mexicans hire bodyguards or relocate abroad for the middle and working class. However, protection is impossible, leaving them exposed to a crime that destroys not only lives, but also trust in society. The oil theft industry, known as huachicoleo, is another crime that highlights the cartel's diversification. Tapping pipelines operated by the state-owned company, PEMEX. Gangs siphon fuel and sell it on the black market at lower prices. Entire communities have participated in or benefited from this trade, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of greed, but the practice is deadly. In 2019, a pipeline explosion in Tlahuelopan killed over 130 people after locals rushed to collect fuel from a leak. The tragedy revealed how poverty and crime intersect, turning criminal activity into a survival mechanism for the poor. Even when it risks their lives, cartels that control huachicoleo gain not only money, but also loyalty from locals who depend on the cheap fuel. Even within prisons, crime flourishes. Many Mexican prisons are effectively run by inmates who pay guards for privileges and continue running operations behind bars. Some prisons have seen riots so violent that dozens die in a single day, not from guards, but from rival gangs clashing inside. El Chapo's escapes highlight how weak the system can be, but even beyond him, countless stories show that imprisonment does not always mean the end of a criminal career. Instead, prisons often function as headquarters where cartel leaders strategize and recruit. This reality undermines public faith in justice, as the supposed punishment becomes just another arena for crime. Despite the bleakness, there are glimmers of hope. Mexican youth movements have risen to challenge the culture of violence, organizing peace marches, art exhibitions, and campaigns that denounce the glorification of narco-life. Universities, artists, and activists create spaces where memory and justice are honored, refusing to let victims be forgotten. International cooperation has also made some impact, with joint operations between Mexico and the US capturing high-profile leaders and disrupting supply chains. Still, Many argue that lasting change cannot come from arrests alone, but from addressing the root causes: poverty, inequality, corruption, and lack of opportunities. Without these changes, crime will simply adapt, producing new leaders, new groups, and new tragedies. Mexico's crime stories, when taken together, are overwhelming in scale and intensity. They tell of a nation where violence became a language, where corruption undermined faith in authority, and where survival often depends on resilience. Yet they also reveal the humanity of those who resist, the mothers who search, the families who march, the journalists who publish, and the communities that endure. These stories are not just about Mexico. They are about universal struggles against crime, power, and injustice. They remind us that even in the darkest corners, courage persists. And as long as people refuse to be silenced, the story is never entirely one of defeat.